This here will become Thomas Shelby from Peaky Blinders. And I'm Mircea Caragea, the sculptor behind it all. Everything begins with a simple block of wood and a generous amount of plastiline. For those unfamiliar with the material, plastiline behaves very much like clay, with one major difference. It never dries. It stays workable forever. You can endlessly reshape it, correct it, destroy it, and build it all over again. The first step is always the same: proportions. Before any details appear, before the eyes, the lips, or the wrinkles, it's only about mass, volume, and silhouette. I begin by building the rough shape of the head. At this stage, it looks absolutely nothing like Thomas Shelby, more like a severely deformed potato. And honestly, that's exactly how it should look. When I first started sculpting, I always made the same mistake. I wanted to sculpt details immediately. But a good sculpture is never built through details. It's built through proportions. The overall shape determines whether a figure feels believable. Using different sculpting tools, I begin carving in the first guidelines, placing the facial features, the eyes, the nose, the mouth. And slowly, I start finding the underlying structure, the forehead, the cheekbones, the position of the jaw. Again and again, I compare the sculpture to the reference images in the background: front view, side profile, three-quarter angle. Especially with Thomas Shelby, this part matters. His face lives through contrast. Sharp cheekbones, slightly hollow cheeks, that cold stare, and, of course, that very specific expression of someone who has probably completed 3 illegal business deals today, while simultaneously questioning the meaning of existence. Now it's time for the hair. At first, I focus mainly on creating volume, trying to establish the overall shape. Material gets removed, rebuilt, corrected. The face changes constantly. And slowly, the sculpture begins developing character. The eye sockets become deeper. The nose finds its final form. The mouth begins to emerge. And the mouth, especially, is incredibly important. Even the smallest adjustment can completely change the expression. Too friendly, and Tommy starts looking like an insurance salesman. Too serious, and we're all concerned about his mental health. So the shapes are adjusted, again and again. At the same time, I constantly pay attention to light and shadow. Because sculptures don't work through shape alone, they work through the way light interacts with those shapes. And time-lapse videos reveal that process beautifully. Small imperfections disappear. Edges become cleaner. Transitions become softer and more natural. And if you've enjoyed the video so far, feel free to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more future projects like this. Now begins the phase where most of the hours disappear without anyone really noticing afterward. The fine detailing. Pores, eyelids, tension in the lips, and most importantly, expression. All those tiny details that slowly make the face feel alive. Using finer sculpting tools, I continue refining the details, while simultaneously polishing the surface itself. Again and again, the surface is smoothed, restructured, adjusted. Sometimes you spend 10 minutes fixing one tiny area, only to realize it looked better 10 minutes ago. That's simply part of sculpting. Sculptures rarely evolve in a straight line. It's more like a constant conversation between observation and correction. As an intermediate step, I now apply a layer of varnish. This creates a protective surface around the sculpture, making it slightly more durable. Because if I accidentally press my finger into the eye, I'd rather not destroy the entire eye socket and sculpt it all over again. It also helps later when removing the sculpture from the mold, but more about that shortly. Now the suit slowly begins to take shape. The clothing needs to sit naturally on the body. Fabric folds should never look random. Fabric has tension, weight, direction. And for a character like Thomas Shelby, the clothing contributes massively to the overall presence. The suit isn't just clothing, it's part of the personality. Clean, elegant, controlled. And eventually, that moment happens. Suddenly, you recognize him. No longer just shapes, no longer just a sculpture, but genuinely Thomas Shelby. From this point on, the final refinement begins. The last details are added, edges sharpened, transitions harmonized. And once the sculpture is finally complete, the next major step begins. Molding. Because this original Plastiline sculpture now needs to become a reproducible, collectible figure. First, I create a silicone mold using Rebound 25, a material so expensive it nearly made me financially unstable. The silicone wraps itself around the sculpture like a second skin, capturing every detail, every wrinkle, every edge, every tiny surface texture. Once cured, it becomes a flexible, negative mold. But silicone alone would be far too soft, so next comes the mother mold, made from plaster. Its entire purpose is exactly what the name suggests: support. It stabilizes everything and ensures the mold keeps its precise geometry during casting. After that, the original Plastiline sculpture gets removed, which honestly hurts a little, considering how many hours went into sculpting it. And now comes one of my favorite moments in the entire process: casting the resin. The empty mold slowly fills with expensive resin. At this point, I am officially bankrupt. Once cured, the positive cast emerges, a permanent version of the original sculpture. And for the very first time, you're actually holding the figure as a real physical object. But even though the sculpting itself is technically finished, the work is far from over, because Tommy is still missing one crucial detail: the cap. So once again, I begin sculpting, this time directly onto the resin cast. The proportions of the cap need to be absolutely precise. Too large, and it starts looking cartoonish. Too small, and it loses that iconic silhouette. Once again, I work using reference images, adjusting the form over and over until it finally feels right. And slowly, the figure becomes complete. And then, the painting begins. Probably the stage where a good sculpture finally transforms into something that feels alive. Layers of paint are carefully built up, skin tones adjusted, shadows deepened, and especially the eyes. The eyes are everything. Because once the eyes work, the entire figure suddenly feels alive. Since I've already sculpted Arthur Shelby as well and sell my sculptures internationally, I often paint multiple figures at the same time. Oh, you want to know where I sell them? Well, that's actually very sweet of you to ask. You can find the link to my Etsy shop in the description below, where you'll discover many more of my sculptures and collectible pieces. And honestly, that's probably the most beautiful part of this entire process. That from a simple block of material, through hours of sculpting, silicone, resin, paint, and patience, a finished figure eventually ends up somewhere else in the world, standing proudly on somebody's shelf. All right, let's continue. And finally, you'll see the completed cinematic shots, the finished sculptures, the final details. And somewhere between all the plastiline, the tools, and the complete chaos covering the table, an idea slowly became something real. By order of the Peaky Blinders and made by myself, thank you so much for watching. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what I should sculpt next. Until next time.